All right, everyone, welcome to our very last online lecture of the semester. This online lecture is the second part of the Putting It All Together series. So the class I've designed today as a sample is a little bit different from my last sample, and I wanted to do something that maybe just gave some examples of a kind of alternative style for teaching a literature class, uh, or rather using a novel in a class. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Before I get to that, just a friendly reminder that your midterm final and group leader self-assessment are all due on December 11th. Feel free to do those early, as I have said every time I see you. Okay, good. So let's get started. So this lesson that I have today is, first of all, it's for intermediate advanced students. Now, there's actually nothing intrinsic to this lesson that means it is for advanced students. It's more the style. The activities that I've chosen here could all easily be adapted for lower level learners. Rather, it's more the level of independence that this lesson reflects in terms of it being for advanced students. So, if you take a look up here, I have my age is 13, although like last time, this lesson could be for younger or older students. It's adaptable, the activities are adaptable for that. This is using The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I've assumed that students have read chapters 1 through 6. So probably this is not the first day that we're talking about this novel. So they have some knowledge of it already. They have some background. They know some basics. So this is not a day one activity for this novel. This is like probably the second or third week, maybe, that these students will be experiencing this novel. I have three learning objectives for this class, and those are here. Whoop, dee-dee. So those learning objectives are students will be able to um, identify and describe most of the characters they've met so far. Students will be able to articulate the two political points of view from the novel. I use the phrase political points of view just to make it short, but what I really mean is there's two warring factions in this novel, right? There's the White Witch and all of the people and animals on her side, and then there's Aslan and his side. Now, at this point in the novel, at chapter 6, we don't really know for 100% sure that Lucy and Peter and Edmund and Susan are on Aslan's side. We can guess that they are, but at this point in the story, we're not 100% sure of that. Write and present. Oh, and finally, my summative assessment, write and present a newscast from the witch's point of view and the beaver's point of view. And this is every student is not going to do this. They're going to be divided into two groups, and I'll talk about that later. So I have two summative assessments. One is to play a 20 question style game using the characters. And the second one is create and present their news. Now, actually, this number one, is kind of a formative and summative assessment in that, in my vision of this class, that summative assessment's not going to be graded, but it does have characteristics of a summative assessment in that it shows a larger understanding of a bunch of different things. So I would say that first one is a combination of formative and summative assessment. Okay, so how am I going to do all of this? So first of all, I'm going to start with this part about characters. So my assessment here, identify and describe most of the characters they've met so far. So as you can see right here, this for the teacher, it says guide large group through quick summary of the events of the story so far. So this is something that when I teach literature or use a novel with younger learners, I always do this at the beginning of every lesson. Some version of what were you supposed to have read? And I've talked about this in class before, the advantages of this being one, it helps students remember what they read because even if they did do the homework, they might not remember everything. So it's a nice review. Two, it helps students who either had a difficult time understanding the homework or students who did not do the homework be caught up. My goal is I don't ever want anyone to be left out. So that is a nice version of that. So when I do this, especially since this activity is this is not the first day, so students will be familiar with this format already. So I'll just say really quickly I'll call on student, if they read chapters, 3 through 6, I'll say, okay, what's the first thing that happens in chapter 3? And I'll go ahead and let them look at their books. So if the students need a reminder, I might tell them. But if not, they can just, if they know the title of the chapter, if I just tell them the title of chapter 3 is Edmund and the Wardrobe, we'll go, okay, so on the board we'll write, okay, Edmund goes to Narnia. Great. And what happens there? He meets the Queen. And then I'll call on students. I'll elicit all of these answers from students. I'm not going to give them anything. The students will walk through what happens in chapter 3, chapter 4, then chapter 5, and then chapter 6. It's unlikely that I will have students where I assign them this much homework. Probably we'll just be doing chapter 6. But at any rate, that's what I would do. That's how I would start this lesson. So that's what's going on with my very first thing here. So after I've done that, we're just going to brainstorm a list of characters. So I'll say to my students, okay, I will call on someone. I actually have a phone app that I use for this that I put all of my students' pictures and names into, and it will randomly select a student in the class, and it will go through all the students so that I know I've called on everyone. This works really well if you have a class size under 30. If it's over 30, you might need to divide that over multiple classes. But I strongly recommend having some version of a way to keep track of making sure you call on every student. So I will call on every student or start going down my list to call on every student to get a list of characters, and we'll do this on the board. So if this is my whiteboard over here underneath where it says putting it all together, I will say, Jongbin, name a character, and Jongbin will say Lucy. And I will do this until students run out, and they will name characters that you forgot were even in the novel. They'll go Beaver. Someone will suggest, oh, the Red Robin. And I don't know if you remember this. I think it's chapter maybe 5, maybe chapter 6, where all the 4 children are in Narnia and they start to follow this Red Robin, and the Red Robin leads them to the beaver house. So not a huge character, but that's okay. If somebody names the Red Robin, great, put it on the board. So once we have our nice long list of all the characters, I'm moving on to this. I'm going to divide the characters among the groups of students and instruct the students to sort of describe each character. And that can be their personality, it can be their physical description, and this one, it can be key personal history. So, if you're talking, for example, about Edmund, you might include the fact that at this point, Edmund has met the witch and seems to kind of like her. So this is an important part that you might include or students might include in his description. So I'll have the students do that on a piece of paper on their own. And I will divide the characters up. So if my students are in groups of 3 or 4, Let's say I have little tables of 3 or 4 students. 4 here, 4 here, 3 here, 4 here, right? If this is my classroom, okay? So I'll say, okay, this group, you guys are going to do the Red Robin and the Beaver. You guys are going to do Lucy and Edmund. You guys are going to do Susan and Peter. You guys are going to do the Witch and the Beavers. And you guys are going to do Edmund and Lucy. And it's okay if they repeat. So then those groups, they'll all have a little piece of paper. It can be just a blank piece of paper, and in English, they'll write their description. After they've done that, so while this is happening, the teacher, and this should be written here, I'm going to walk around. I'm going to walk around to each group. I'm going to make sure they're on task, guide them to continue to use their English, as well as help them if they have misunderstood any instructions, give them a little more guidance if necessary. But mostly a kind of formative assessment of listening in on each group to see and make sure that they're on task and that they're doing what I've asked them to do. And then once they're all done, I'm gonna give them little pieces of paper, a piece of paper about the size of a card, and I will have them write the name of their characters, one on each piece of paper. So that'll be the end of that. So now we get to the part where we are doing this game and this formative assessment. So my description here of the game is not great, so I'm going to talk about it now. So this is a game where you have a piece of paper, and on that paper is written a name. And so what happens is a student will take this piece of paper and they are not allowed to look at it, and they will put it on their forehead so that the name Lucy is facing out, but the person holding the paper up to their forehead cannot see it. But other people walking around can see it. So for example, this is a student and they have this little piece of paper and it's in their hand, right? And they don't look at it. So then they put their hand up here like this. And they're walking around the classroom holding this piece of paper on their forehead, and it says Lucy. This student does not know that Lucy is written on their paper. So here's how the game works. They walk around the classroom, and this person, let's call this person, we'll say Jongbin. So this is my student, Jongbin. So Jongbin is trying to figure out who he is. He's Lucy, but he doesn't know. So Jongbin's going to walk up to another student and ask yes or no questions. And this isn't important to explain because Jongbin cannot walk up to a classmate and go, who am I? Because they'll just go Lucy, and that won't be any kind of exercise at all. So he has to ask yes or no questions. So he can ask, am I human? And if the answer is yes, that's a clue. And he can go, okay, am I a boy? No. Am I kind? So bearing in mind that all of the practice vocabulary for this, they already did when they did their small groups and they described all of the characters. So they're warmed up for talking about characters and doing physical descriptions. So theoretically, they'll all walk around. Once you guess who you are, you get to sit down. That tends to motivate them. If my classes are small, I will also play. If my classes are big and I need to move around and keep everyone on task, then I won't play. But usually as the teacher, I try to participate like I'm a student as much as possible. So I would say if the class is under 20 students, then the teacher can just play and is able to focus on all the students a little bit. But if the class is too big, that becomes too difficult. So that's what I would be doing, either walking around, keeping students on task, or playing myself and trying to guess my own character. Okay, so once that's done and everyone's sitting down, then we've completed sort of that part. Now, what often happens to me as a teacher, and I have mentioned this before, is my lessons tend to go a little long. So if I'm sensing that I have made a big mistake on how long everything takes and all of this has taken a long time, this is a good place for me to stop for the day. And if I have like 5 minutes left, usually what I'll do if I have 5 minutes left is I'll give my students what's called an exit ticket. And an exit ticket is just when you require every student to engage with you, the teacher, before they leave. So, for example, an exit ticket might be a question. So, my question might be, um, let's say, for example, my question is Lucy a good person? And why? If I feel like I have a lot of time, I'll say why. So if I have like a little 5 minute window left, but I'm not ready to move on because I don't want to interrupt my next activity and I want to save it for next time, I'll do an exit ticket. So every student has to answer this question for me. I'll say, is Lucy a good person? Why? And then once they've answered that question, once everyone has answered the question, then they can leave. So this is exit tickets or something similar is just one of the strategies that I have for how to sort of make up the difference when I've messed up my time and I want to stop because I don't want to start my next thing, but I have a few minutes of class left. Um, so anyway, after this game with the guessing who you are, then we are going to do a slightly more advanced, not slightly, a significantly more advanced summative assessment activity. And this is something that I think the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe really lends itself to this activity, and I think the students have fun with it. And basically, the idea here is the students are going to create a news broadcast and they're going to get one of two choices. They're either going to be on the witch's side or they're going to be on Aslan's side. So one of the sort of conversations that Edmund has with Peter is whose side should they be on? And Edmund, who has already met the witch, is wandering, they're walking around together. And Peter says to, sorry, not Peter, Edmund says to Peter, how do we know that we're on the right side here? Because he's thinking about the witch. Um, so this is for me on page 70. This is right at the end of chapter 6. Edmund says to Peter, have you realized what we're doing? We're following a guide we know nothing about. How do we know which side that bird is on? Why wouldn't it be leading us to a trap? And then Edmund goes on to say, if it comes to that, which is the right side? How do we know that the fawns are in the right and the queen, yes, I know we've been told she's a witch, is in the wrong? We don't really know anything about either. So there's a lot of discussion in the novel about, at least up to this point through chapter 6, about whose side should we be on, the fawn and the Aslan side or the witch and the wolves side. So since that's set up in the book, this summative assessment asks students to think about the events of the novel from two different points of view. There's, whoops, I don't have like an erasing feature, so I have to just continue to like tell it to go back. So sorry about that. So there's two different points of view, right? There's the witch who thinks that she is the queen of Narnia. So we have the witch's side, and then we have Aslan's side. So the idea of this summative assessment is that the students do a news broadcast from each point of view. And the summary that you have done, or I would have done with the students earlier, where we went over a summary of what happened, that's the news. So if you're the witch and you're on her side, how do you talk about Edmund and Lucy coming into Narnia? How do you talk about Mr. Tumnus the fawn? And if you're on the witch's side, well, the Mr. Tumnus and the fawn, he's kind of a bad guy because he hid Lucy. And if you're on Aslan's side, well, the fawn is a hero. So depending on your students, they might need more or less guidance with this. My instinct usually is to give them as little guidance as possible. And the reason for that is I don't want to put any limits on what they come up with. I thought of the fawn and how different the two sides look at Mr. Tumnus, but they might think of something else. And I don't want to stop them from thinking of something else by giving them too many examples. So first on the board, discuss the two competing sides in the novel. And in this situation, you would have two lists, right? And those two lists, so you have the witch on one side and Aslan on the other side. And so how are they different? Okay, well, the witch, likes winter, and the witch thinks she's queen, and there's no Christmas. And most of our information about Aslan and his side at this point comes from Mr. Tumnus. So you might guide the students to the parts of the book where Lucy talks about why Mr. Tumnus does not like the White Witch, and her first conversation with Mr. Tumnus about her capture and all that. So the students may need guidance to those pages, or they may not. It depends. But at any rate, you make these two lists on the board. And then this one right here where we go over learn script writing. This is something that if it's my class, that students, by the time we get to chapter 6 of a novel, they've already heard me say this, where I give a brief sort of review of how to write a script. So basically, you have the person speaking's name, and then what they say, and then the next person, and then what they say. Now, this is for the news, so they don't need to have any actions. But anyway, if necessary, we'll review that. And even if it's something that we've already done, we'll review it. So then I'll divide the students into teams and assign a side to each team. So if I have 4 groups of students, 4 groups of 4, if it's a small class, or maybe it's whatever, 20 students and there's groups of 4. So maybe these 3 will be the witch's news and these 2 will be Aslan's news. And I'll tell them, just a moment, I'm going to get a little bit more blank paper here. So I'll tell them, first you want to come up with your news show name. Then you're going to read your headlines. Now, depending on my students, you might have to remind them that everybody has to talk, meaning nobody in your team can just sit there silently. So that is basically the sort of teacher talk time here. Divide them into teams. Then they create their news broadcast. So they write it down. They're going to create a script. And then they're going to practice their scripts, and then they'll present. And that would be their summative assessment. Now, this is the kind of thing that for me, this is going to be not an exam. This is a grade, an assignment. So I may or may not give them a rubric for this. This is a little less formal. So while it would be for a score, because I think that this level of work, this is a lot of work for them, should be rewarded. It's not so serious that I will necessarily give them an entire rubric for. So this is one of my favorite things to do. The students really, in my experience, understand and adapt to this format. They instantly understand that they're supposed to go, good evening, everybody. This is Aslan News. Today, a daughter of Eve came into our town. They really understand the format because we've all seen the news, and they've often surprised me with their creativity and their ability to do that. So this is all of that, higher level skills, right? This is that synthesizing, if we want to go into Bloom's taxonomy, that, taking what you know and then creating something new out of it. So this is a real higher level thinking skill. And it shows a really strong understanding of the plot and the story. It gets them practicing their speaking, practicing presentation skills, um, practicing also their writing skills because they have to write the script. So it just covers a lot, gives them a lot of engagement with the L2, and I'm a huge fan of this kind of activity. So this lesson is really focused on a student-centered learning environment that in terms of time, most of the time, the teacher is just listening. And my goal with a lesson like this, especially with advanced learners, is to talk as little as possible. And that's sort of the style and version of this lesson that I've produced here. So it's a little different from a lot of the things we've seen in our class so far, but I wanted to show just kind of an alternative way to construct a class about literature or about a novel. Okay, so that's all from me about that. Um, Next week, we have our last Zoom class. Our group leaders can talk about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Um, and try to finish the novel by December 3rd so that your group leaders can have access to whatever content they would like. And that's all. And congratulations, you have now watched all of the online lectures for our class. So way to go. I'll see you guys on December 3rd. I hope you have a beautiful day.